My name is Walter Bennett, and I am an old man now. My hair has turned white, my hands have lost their strength, and my body is no longer what it used to be. Every day I sit quietly by the window of my small room at the Golden Years home, watching the trees sway gently in the breeze as the wind touches their leaves like a memory brushing past the present. And with every rustle, fragments of my past drift back to me like waves. Some bring a faint smile to my tired face, and others bring tears that have waited years to fall. I once had a wife, Eleanor, a woman whose warmth lit up every room, whose laughter filled our home with joy, and whose smile could soften the hardest days. We built a life together, raised 3 children, 2 boys and a little girl. And though I worked long hours to give them everything I never had, Eleanor made our house a home, cooking meals, helping with homework, and making sure our children always felt loved. The house echoed with laughter, birthdays, bedtime stories, and the quiet rhythm of family. But time, as it does, moved on. The children grew up, found their own circles, chased their dreams, and slowly the dinner table grew quieter. Eleanor would always say, "They'll come back, Walt. They love us." And I believed her because I wanted to. But then, one winter, Eleanor fell ill, and everything changed. I stayed by her bedside, cooked the meals she once made for me, held her hand through the night, told her stories just to see her smile. But her strength faded like dusk giving in to night. And one evening she looked at me with tired eyes and whispered, "Take care of the children. They need you." And just like that, she closed her eyes and never opened them again. My world broke, not loudly but quietly, like a glass falling into soft grass. No sound, but shattered all the same. I had hoped the children would stay close, would feel the empty space she left behind. But life was fast, and they were busy. They visited less and less, until one day they sat me down and said, "Dad, you shouldn't live alone anymore. It's better if you move to a care home." And I wanted to say no, scream it in fact. But I saw the tiredness in their eyes, the detachment, and I simply nodded, because I knew I didn't belong in their world anymore. So now I sit here, in a quiet room, where the clock ticks louder than conversations, and the nurses, though kind, are always rushing. They bring me food, my medication, sometimes a polite smile, but no one really sits down to ask about the man I used to be. Every morning, I wake up before the sun, sit by the window, and watch the sky blush into gold. And for a few moments, I feel peace, until the silence creeps back in. I think of Eleanor, of our children, of the times I carried them on my shoulders, played catch in the yard, taught them how to ride a bike, held their hands through their first days of school. And now they're gone, scattered into their own lives, calling only sometimes with voices that sound hurried. "Hey, Dad, how are you? We're just heading out. Take care, okay?" And I always say, "I'm fine," even though I'm not, because they don't have time to hear otherwise. One of the nurses, a young girl named Clara, gave me a notebook one day and said, "Write Mr. Bennett, it helps." And at first I didn't know what to do with it. My hands shook as I held the pen. But eventually, the words began to pour out like rain from a cloud that had waited too long to cry. I wrote about Eleanor's soft voice and the way she'd sing while cooking, about the children's laughter, their scraped knees and school plays, the way my daughter would twirl in the living room in her new dress shouting, "Daddy, look at me." That notebook became my only real friend, and every night I would write in it, as if I were still speaking to Eleanor, or to my children who no longer had time to listen. I hoped that one day they might read it, understand me, remember me. But some days, I wondered if they even would, or if I'd just become a name at the bottom of their to-do list. Then one afternoon, while sitting in the garden, a little boy, the nurse's son, ran up to me and said, "Hi, Grandpa," with a grin that reminded me of my youngest son when he was 5. And he asked, "Do you have stories?" And oh, I had stories. So I told him about my childhood, the river I swam in, the trees I climbed, my best friend Charlie, who once built a treehouse that barely held our weight. And the boy listened with wide eyes, nodding, smiling. And for a brief moment, I didn't feel like a forgotten man. I felt like a grandfather again. After he left, I sat in the silence he had broken, wondering if my real grandchildren even knew I existed. If they knew I was waiting, wanting, remembering. That night, I asked Clara if I could call my eldest son, and when he picked up, I said, "I miss you, son. I'd love to see you." And he replied, "I'll try to visit soon." And those words, "try to," were like a door that never quite opens. That night I couldn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling, whispering to Eleanor, "Please, bring them back." The next day I decided to write letters, one for each child, and in them I poured every word I never got to say. To my eldest son, I wrote about the nights I stayed up helping him build his science projects, about the time he broke his arm, and I sat by his hospital bed all night, humming lullabies under my breath. To my daughter, I wrote, "You are my sunshine," just like I used to sing when she danced barefoot in the kitchen. And I reminded her how proud I was when she graduated. To my youngest, I wrote about our fishing trips, about how he laughed when he caught his first fish and ran around like he'd won the lottery. When I finished, I sealed the letters and gave them to Clara, who promised to send them. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. The next morning, I sat in the garden, eyes closed, imagining their faces reading those words. Would it move them? Would they feel anything? But days passed, then weeks, and no replies came. No phone calls, no visits, just the same routine, the same quiet meals, the same aching heart. Until one day, Clara walked in, holding an envelope with familiar handwriting, and said, "Mr. Bennet, you have mail." I opened it with trembling hands. It was from my eldest, and in it he apologized, told me how work had taken over his life, how he thought about me often, but never found the time to call, and that he would visit soon with his children, my grandchildren whom I'd never met. I cried, not loud, but deep, the way a soul cries when it's been waiting too long. I read the letter over and over, showed it to Clara, who smiled and said, "See, they do care." And though I tried not to get my hopes up, I couldn't help but wait. Every day I sat by the window, listening for a car, watching every shadow pass the gate, telling the other residents proudly, "My son's coming to visit." Days turned into weeks again, and doubt crept back in like an old familiar ache. So I wrote again, this time to my daughter, and told her how much that one letter had meant to me, how I missed our talks, her singing, her presence. I waited, and in the meantime, the little boy kept visiting, kept bringing me drawings. One day he brought a picture of a family under a tree and said, "This is your family." And I placed it next to the letter on my table like a treasure. Then, one bright morning, I heard footsteps down the hall. Not hurried nurse steps, but careful, familiar ones. And then, the door opened, and there stood my eldest son, holding the hands of 2 shy children. "Dad," he said, "I'm here." And I opened my arms and held him like I hadn't held him in years. while the children giggled and handed me drawings they made. One of a house with a garden, and one of an old man smiling. "This is you, Grandpa," said Liam. And I looked at Emma and Liam and said, "Hello, my sweethearts," with a heart so full I thought it would burst. We talked for hours, and when they left, he said, "I'll come back soon, and this time I mean it." And then, a few days later, my daughter came too. We hugged, talked, cried. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt seen, heard, loved. The emptiness began to shrink, and in its place bloomed something I thought was lost forever: hope. As the months passed, their visits became regular, and the little boy still came, still drew, still asked for stories. And one day he said, "Mr. Bennet, you look happier now." And I smiled. Yes, I am. I still miss Eleanor every single day, but I know she'd be proud. Proud that I kept going. Proud that I waited. Proud that the love we planted all those years ago finally came home.